Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. This is supposed to be a Cohiba. We'll see if it smokes like one. So far, so good. But it's an early smoke. Alexa said it was 42 out here. My phone says it's 46. Somewhere in there. Today we're going to talk about the Hutchison Effect. I've mentioned it several times in episodes. Just mentioned it recently, and one of the listeners thankfully reminded me, hey dude, you need to do an episode on that. I'm like, oh yeah. As my buddy Bobby Blotzer says, idiot! Directed at me for not doing it earlier. So thank you so much for the suggestion. So what's interesting about the Hutchison Effect is obviously back in the 80s and 90s when he was supposedly doing all these experiments and videotaping them with what I guess might be some of the worst video camera quality on planet Earth. I had no idea this guy existed. The rags that I read, I don't remember ever mentioning the guy. Yeah, I was reading, mass products like Scientific American, Omni Magazine, that kind of thing. Apparently, they've done some specials on the guy, and maybe that's where I saw it once. I don't remember, but I remember seeing the videos a long time ago. So I just did a huge dive into this guy, and there's so much to talk about. Hopefully. He's an eccentric guy, John Hutchison. He was, I believe, in the general Ontario area. Initially, I think one of the last videos I saw where he's being interviewed, he was in near the coast of Oregon. He reminds me of like a science Stephen Piercy from Rat. And because I was very close to that band for many, many years, and I know Stephen, at least as an acquaintance, they have very similar mannerisms when they speak, at least the way he is today. They kind of have that black hair, Spanish, conquistador look, slash maybe some Native American blood in at least Piercy. It's kind of a gentle soul. What would be interesting to do is get that lady who does all the body language analysis to analyze him during at least this 3-part interview I saw on AAG, which is, I think, American Anti-Gravity Group or something like that. So I'm watching these videos, and then I'm watching, I read all the critiques about what the skeptics think about his videos. And if you're not familiar with this entire thing, I guess I should recap. A man named John Hutchison said that he had created in his little laboratory with a bunch of old Navy equipment, which looks great when you film it. If you don't know anything about electronics, boy, it's just like a set from some sci-fi movie, But he has these videotapes of objects that he made levitate. And we're going to go into sort of the objects that moved around, how they moved around, the skepticism of how he made that happen. But then there's an entire second wave of his accomplishments, if you will, that I think is a little bit more interesting, and it seems to hold more credibility. Just got a bunch of hair hanging off the front of my face here. But he was bending metal with electromagnetic waves to make it easy for everyone to understand. And that's most likely a generalization that is still accurate, whether or not you think it's down to a piezo effect or some other effect. The Hutchison Effect. And this metal, which I just saw a funny video claiming to have a solid iron bar do this effect. But he has all of this aluminum and various metals that he has tormented with electricity in such a way that it ruptured, it melted, it twisted apart. And I'm not sure why everyone's so blown away by this. But that has a whole separate wave of pieces of evidence. Now, here's what you got to understand. This guy supposedly calls a guy to help him film things while he's running the equipment, And supposedly that guy has come out and said, man, if you don't believe it's real, then you're stupid. I was there and it was real. Okay. In terms of, and this guy's supposed to be a National Geographic, certified cameraman, and having filmed professionally myself, I filmed sporting events, I've filmed concerts, I've done music videos where I'm the cameraman. If this guy was a professional cameraman, then he utterly and completely blew anything. And I think what's going on is he's involved with a conspiracy on the first set of the videos, and so he's defending it with these sort of statements of, you know, you're dumb if you don't believe it. John Hutchinson has never, ever, ever been able to recreate his levitation experiments, which is the first wave and the first claim. What you will see is vice grips, or not vice grips, like the adjustable wrench fly off this wooden plank. You will see a saw, like an old hand saw. You will see a cup of water. You will see plastic pieces of stuff. I mean, you know, it's just... Later, I believe in 1991, because he's been unable to ever recreate this, which we're going to go back and analyze what that really means, because it makes no sense. Makes no sense. He shot a video of a little round thing that looked like a flying saucer, like an old 50s flying saucer on his desk, jumping up and down on the desk. Apparently, this is one he filmed by himself because everyone eventually said, oh man, I can see the wires. At one point, he lied about the wires, and then finally he came clean and said, yeah, I faked that one. I used wires. But the other ones are real, and I can't recreate it. Okay. When you look at his experiments, with all of the trickery we know now, all the special effects we know now, I'm going to tell you, if you quickly pay attention to a lot of these situations, it looks like in many cases, there's a single wire, same technique he used on the UFO thing, that he is pulling objects up with the wire. Now, he's been accused of attaching an electromagnet, like the big kind that they use at salvage yards to pick up cars and move them around. But he's got a smaller one over his experiment area, which is a wooden box. And you have to have a wooden box because that way the box itself won't move when this thing turns on. Or at least it won't interfere and that sort of thing. But they think some of the objects that flew up were being yanked up by a magnet. Now, I did see one video where the adjustable wrench, I still need to slow it down, but it looks almost like it does some 360s, full 360s, which would negate any type of string. But most everything has the point where the string is attached, or strings attached, and you will see it pull from that string. Now, if you had a Hutchison effect, I'm assuming, and it's making something levitate, there's a whole bunch of requirements with that. You could grab a piece of the steel with this pulse that you're generating. And of course, he had the Tesla coils and things that look amazing, right? It's just like having a Jacob's ladder in some old movie to look scientific in the background. There's none of his lab equipment in these videos while he's doing this stuff. God, there's so many angles here. If the wave was big enough to grab the adjustable wrench, for instance, it wouldn't do any flipping necessarily. Why would it flip? I mean, it's sort of a strange thing. If it is losing its ethereal or it's increasing its ethereal permeability, ooh, easy for me to say, then the ether goes through the wrench, and the ether that was pushing on it starts to relax, and then it levitates. It should just levitate, even if it's going to fly off the screen. But the idea that it's flying off the screen means that, as a cameraman especially, oh, how far did it go up in the air? This is like a device that if I hit you on the head with it, you're going to die. And there's someone filming it supposedly, and no one's like, oh my God, it went through the roof or it bumped the ceiling. Let's take a picture of that. Nope. Because there's either a magnet or a marionette string system above it. They don't ever pan the camera up. They don't ever film the entire environment. And this guy can't recreate its sense. So where do we have moments in life where we do something special and we can't recreate it? Because I want to annihilate that sensibility right away. Well, a couple things that are legit things that you accidentally do that you can't do again makes sense to me. You were messing around in the kitchen. You were not videotaping yourself. You're throwing a little bit of salt, a little bit of sugar, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And you're not remembering how much you did, but whatever you created is the best casserole, best pastry in the world, whatever it is. And the family goes, oh my God, please make that again. And you're like, oh gosh, I'm going to try. Next time I'll start paying attention to how much I threw in. Your best bet, even though you might be full in your stomach, would be to go back in the kitchen immediately and before you forget and try to just say, everybody go away, don't bother me, don't talk to me. In fact, leave the house if you can, go to your bedrooms, and then you try to recreate that thing. The other one might be a situation where you're mixing paint. And again, the quantities are a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Maybe if you're painting an oil painting or acrylic painting, it can get, you don't know what you did. That's why my buddy Sid Mead would always mix all of his colors to the quantity that he needed once he determined the colors that he wanted. And he kept them in these little sauce things that you get at restaurants. And he never had to mix again. And that way he knew the color he mixed was the one you were going to see forever. Good deal. But now, we're in a scientific laboratory. And regardless if this guy doesn't know mathematics at all, which I actually have no problem with that whatsoever, but he has somehow twisted knobs and somehow directed an energy beam at these objects, and that's one thing I didn't see filmed. What is creating this field? You will read stuff that, for people that apparently don't know anything about science, like, he owns testicles, so the testicles, it's like, okay, film it. Mr. National Geographic professional photographer, film it. Don't just tell me I'm stupid because I'm looking at observable reality and it looks like a really bad attempt at a magic trick by some, middle school kid. But once you get an indication and you get an effect to occur, guess what you do? Especially if you don't know what the hell you're doing. You don't touch any of the knobs after that. You stop. If you don't have a camera, because everything was 35 millimeter, take it down to photomat, wait a week to get it done, fine. You should have that. You should just go and buy one if you have this amazing, never-before-seen thing. But at a minimum, you get a patent paper out, every single knob that is participating in this event. If a machine has power and it's a part of this effect, you transcribe button, that's a 3. This other button, that's a 4. This one's on 11, whatever it is, and you write it down so that you can do it again. You would not just, well, so we're done, let's just rewind all the buttons and mess everything up and go to bed. I don't think anyone is that stupid. Anyone. And I don't think that John Hutchinson is that stupid. So I therefore think that at least in this particular realm of levitation, it's a hoax. 100%. Was it Honda P? Yeah, what's interesting about the whole thing is you might think I'm like, I'm ready to dismiss this guy and call him a kook and all that kind of stuff. He's a very eccentric guy. He comes off as a very gentle soul. Everybody's ever talked to the guy said he's just the sweetest guy ever. And so we know charlatans. Charlatans typically are people that are very gregarious and very egotistical. This guy does not appear to me to be like that. I just watched a 2015 interview with the AAG. But I think when I look at his body language in the AAG video, the American Anti-Gravity Group or whatever it is, he's interested to tell his story, but at the same time, there's pain on his face of like, oh crap, I gotta lie again. But there's a second tier of it, which is his metal, which is going to clean up a little bit of his credibility, in my opinion. Now, one of the claims is that people who have visited him, and this is on video, he is rummaging through a box, and there's just a tremendous amount of correspondence with official groups like NASA, the Navy, Los Alamos Labs, ... Well, if you create a fairly convincing video in the 80s and the early 90s, minus your admitted fake, yeah, you can get a lot of people talking to you. Whether or not anything materializes is a completely different thing. But someone suggested if you think he's a fake, then you haven't looked at his box of correspondence with these groups. Well, if you know nothing about mathematics, how much could you correspond with professionals that live through mathematics to get these things done? If he can't recreate it, then wow. I mean, there's a whole bunch of mental issues with not being able to remotely get close to what you did. It means you had no clue what you were doing. It was just an accident, and so on and so forth. There's this dude Hathaway who wrote a book on him, who apparently was really excited about turning him into a profit margin. He has the Hathaway Research Institute, which is very fascinating. Claims he does work for NASA and DARPA. And let me tell you, if you do work for DARPA, for real, you're not just putting the logo on your website, then you're no dummy. He wrote the book about Hutchison and apparently didn't dispute much of what he claimed, but today he now says the guy is insane and a quack and all that kind of stuff. Strange how those opinions change. There was a claim that Hathaway actually contacted John to work for his research institute, and he turned it down. And apparently the claim is that after that reluctance to work for the Hathaway Research Institute, which I don't know if any of that's true, okay? I can't see how John would resist a big fat paycheck because he seems to live in, 500 square foot homes, apartments, and he likes to buy things. And, come on, let's document this. In the end, if you wanted to recreate the Hutchison experiment, there's an interesting correlation here. I think I told you guys in a previous episode about a dude who faked a score on the Atari 2600, I think, which is a drag race game. He lied about his score. And he got a job testing games, running around being a representative at conferences, at computer electronics conferences and that kind of thing, all based on this lie. But in the 21st century, programmers got into the source code of that video game, the drag race video game, and made the computer play a computer at maximum efficiency with every conceivable strategy to play the game. And they found out that that score he claimed, like an 83 or something, was impossible to get. The dude still holds true to this day, and all he does is say, well, you weren't there. Okay. With that line of thinking, the reason why I bring that up is, let's just say the government was interested in this. And they say, okay, Mr. Hutchison, please tell me all of the equipment that you had powered on during this experiment. What's the model number and year of all the equipment that you have? Because we'll go find copies, or we'll buy your equipment off of you, or we'll take it on loan or whatever. But believe me, the government can get anything they want. They then could write a piece of software to adjust every single conceivable dial that was involved in this experiment until one day, with a video camera on it or some other AI detecting whether or not this thing happened. I mean, if something levitates, well, then you don't have a contact point between its base and the object itself, and it could just send somebody a text message and go, got it, come on back. That's not occurring. So for him not to be able to recreate it, for me, again, is 1,000% proof he never did it. No one changes the variables on something that just did an ungodly thing, an amazing thing. And I just mean that as a figure of speech. It's probably very godly. I also read an article that, and I had forgotten this, I had seen the Judy Wood presentation about directed energy weapons involved with that one day back 19 years ago. This is 2020. And she had, I guess, apparently they're claiming that she referenced his experiments. I don't see how the levitation experiments have anything to do with it, but I do see how the metallurgy stuff that he did later on would definitely do it. Now, the thing is he's being interviewed. He's showing off all these metals, which I'm going to reintroduce, that had undergone massive transformations and apparently been sent all around the world, although he just says it was sent to Germany. Okay, where in Germany, man? Your buddy Hunter or Otto, or, I mean, like, where is it? Is it in some, well-established laboratory that's known for doing, like the other NASA over there? I mean, tell me, where is this thing going? Don't just say, this is a product that he used in Europe, that's why you should buy it. It's like, there's so much marketing. If you're in Europe, and you understand there's so much snake oil sold in the United States, and the marketing is as used in Europe. It's like, whatever. So if you're not familiar with his second half of what he was able to accomplish, it looks, he would take various metals, from copper to aluminum to iron, steel, pot steel, and he was able to exert some force on it using electricity, apparently. And as one might assume, especially if you're an ethereal scientist, he disturbed the very molecular forces within these pieces of steel and got them to do all kinds of wild random things, almost like a Mandelbrot explosion inside. That one seems like it makes a lot of sense. And again, I watched other videos of other people doing it. Now, the funny one I watched was a guy that supposedly, I mean, you watch the video, he's filming a black iron 2x2 square, and he gets it to eventually start wiggling and torque and turn, and it's like a little bit of smoke coming off of it, and then he gets in real close to it, and he films it, and it looks like it's something else, maybe painted black or maybe some iron paint on it. I don't know what it is, but the one thing the dude never did was tap it with a hard object so you could hear that it was actually iron and not some other thing. Very funny. Very funny. Did like a double helix spin on this thing. Could be real, but come on, tap it. Let me know this thing is really at least a metal. Now, we talked about in many episodes, especially the Coral Castle episode, right? Limestone could be made fairly weightless, thus making building pyramids and the Coral Castle extremely possible. And you have to understand the coral that's in Coral Castle is actually a limestone derivative, so this works on both those types of rocks. Could also work on granite. And the theory I suggested in the video is pretty much exactly what is being inferred with this Hutchison metal distortion algorithm that's being run on the metal, which is the following. If you can attach an electrode to one end of a stone and then an electrode at the other end of the stone, and then pump a sufficient amount of electricity at a particular frequency, and I'm going to make it a little more romantic and suggest that perhaps they're using a sacred geometry type frequency, very much like the cymatics stuff that you've seen with sand on speakers. There's a gigantic series of YouTube videos on the Coral Castle wheel and the magnets that are all amazingly created. I mean, this wheel that looks awful and old and rusted, if you just study its composition and its function, and the crank wheel, there's a prime number algorithm in that wheel that is phenomenal. And this dude does this, I mean, it must be 15 hours. I had to watch it over several days back in, I think, 2013 when I was coding a different project in my house. There's all kinds of Masonic relations to this prime number. It's a quadratic prime number equation where you get 4 prime numbers to go in a row. I mean, it's a very amazing thing. But if you could resonate, and what you're trying to do is get an electromagnetic field to crawl within the fabric of whatever you're working with to achieve the true Hutchison effect, which is to then convince the atoms within the limestone, which may be very susceptible to this and other things aren't, which is why we don't have potentially basalt pyramids. You know, I mean, it may not be capable of having this issue work. But you're allowing, again, ethereal winds, which are the true culprits of gravity, pushing down on us, to have much of it pass directly through the stone itself by aligning the atoms and keeping them from vibrating as much, by controlling them with other ethereal winds dictated by the electricity that's going through it. For any of you who are familiar with how an LED crystal, liquid crystal display works, an LCD, it's a bunch of swimming fibers that when swimming around, it's typically the background, which is when you look at a digital watch back from the 70s and 80s, you would have a non-black area that was sort of them not electrified. But when you electrified them, you take these little shards and you line them up perfectly up and down. And so when you look down into the watch, the black that you're seeing is actually a black paint below the swimming crystals. So you're lining them up and down. Any of you study semiconductors, and you guys have seen that Mobius strip with the quantum locking, where they put the little puck on a Mobius strip, and then the guy pushes it, and it floats around the Mobius strip, and infinitely with almost zero friction. It goes forever. It goes a long time. Quantum locking is another way of enforcing the matter within this little region. You have to cool the conductor down, put some electricity on it, and you get this locking. These are all clues. These are all stepping stones into anti-gravity, which is why, again, very high up government officials have always told my buddy Sid Mead that anti-gravity was completely figured out in the mid-90s, and that today it's just very simple to create. Don't know if that's true, but these dudes were the guys running the programs, not just workers inside. And I don't know who those people are, to be honest, but Sid would always very casually tell me about the last visit. And, oh, yeah, well, they said they had this, spinning mercury was way back in the 60s and various other techniques. But never, the last time the dude visited Sid, whatever technique he explained to Sid was so, I don't know, abstract or what have you. Sid didn't follow it very well. So when he told me kind of generally what the guy said, it didn't make any sense to me. Maybe it totally made sense to what actually happened, and I just lacked the ability to understand it, but that would be a surprise to me. Not to be arrogant, but just this is something I've looked into a lot. Now, what's interesting about the metallurgy stuff, the twisting of the metal, is that you have, at least the one I saw, and the way that he describes it, he doesn't describe the setup of the experiment. And maybe this dude lacks just the most fundamental understanding of scientific principles for conducting experiments. Having your control and other notation about what instruments are involved, what's the setup, get a pen and paper and just draw little lines going, this was attached to this, and these buttons and knobs on my equipment were set to these things. It would seem that in every single video I've ever seen with this guy interviewed in the modern day, he does not do what every single scientist I've ever seen do. Eric Dollard, for instance, would never let anyone contest his, I think it was Badlands videos in the 80s, because the dude would just say, okay, give me 10 grand and I'll build that right in front of your face and then we'll just get this over with. He would prove it to you right in your face. Now, John Hutchison, he seems to be completely content with having all of his accomplishments done when no one else is around, never remembers how it works, and then showing you what he can show you in the modern day. Seems really strange. But then I did an episode on directed energy weapons. It's not terribly difficult to believe in directed energy weapons. And again, I have a friend of mine who I think I trust. He was working for a water purification company in Arizona. And so he had a lot of hardware available to him. And he said that he was able to use the, the pot steel that paper clips are made out of, which is not a terribly, stern metal. And he was able to put them on some sort of oscillator or something that was projecting electricity into the paperclip, and he said he could get them to vaporize just out of sight in a couple seconds. It just kind of get hot and go poof, it'd go away. The claim about this metallurgy experiment phase of his discoveries is that these metals do everything that they do without ever getting hot. Even the dude who supposedly turned this I guess, wrought iron 2x2 dowel It's like square. Even though it smoked a little bit, he said that there was no heat. And you don't see any heat. You don't see it glow. Have any of you ever taken a piece of metal and it's kind of, malleable. You can bend it and you bend it, and then you touch the bending point and it burns your finger because the friction's there. Same thing when you rub your hands together when you're cold. I've just seen so many scientific presentations and so many interviews with individuals who have figured out how to do something, especially when I did all my quantum computing research for that episode I did, I believe last season. You would have these guys in a laboratory showing you how, I think, like phosphorus and these other elements were being stabilized, atoms being stabilized to an extent they could make them into a qubit. And there's plenty of experimentation. They'll just show it to you. Now, I just want to mention this very briefly. I think it's part of the factor in this sort of thing. When you think that you are sensing a hoax, okay, there's a certain type of personality that wants to do a hoax. And there's different degrees of it. There's those that want to run around and really be in the press. They really, really want to be interviewed a lot and what have you. Even though John has done a lot of interviews, it doesn't seem like that's his game. It could be, wow, I faked a bunch of crap and look, I got a bunch of attention, so I don't really want to get caught up in conversations I can't articulate back. Never bothered Einstein. He would just run out and do conferences on his photoelectric effect, not knowing how it worked. I mean, So some dudes don't care. I think this guy is trying to protect himself, but he knows he has to make an income. Now, he has really long black hair. Last interview I just saw with him, I saw a 2015 one, and then he had a cap like mine on. Again, he just seems like a gentleman, so I don't mean to cast aspersions on the guy whatsoever, other than maybe, he was trying to do something profound and found out that, hey, trickery is probably the easiest way he can validate himself. But he was wearing like a woman's wig. There's a lot of pictures of him wearing wigs. And at first I thought it was someone that was messing with thumbnail just to get you to click in. And then I just saw a whole interview where he's sitting down and he's in a big red shirt, which I wasn't sure if that was a dress or a shirt. But so there's something going on there. There's a vanity going on. There's sort of one of these things that, if you walk out in public as a man wearing a straight black or brown wig on, fashioned like a woman, that if you aren't like Wendy Carlos, it may not make any sense, So God bless the guy. He's doing what he wants to do with his life, and I support him 100%. But there looks like there might be some other factors psychologically that might play a role in this conversation. I just want to put that out there just in case you know about that and you're like, geez, I wonder why he's not talking about that thing, because that's what blew up for me, But the principle is levitation, I think, is 100% capable with the technique in general that he's talking about, which is to infect anything that can absorb electrons, or at least have electrons even pass through it. It could be wood. Wood's not a conductive material. It's very dense, but you can move electrons through wood. And so if you could just simply convince the atoms in the wood to stack up in a more aligned fashion, not cease to be, but stack up in an aligned fashion, the ether will start passing through it, just like light passing through a liquid crystal, so you can see the background. Instead of seeing the background, what ends up happening is the ether passes through the object and hits the Earth's surface or whatever's below it, thus making it levitate. The other thing about the objects flying up in his videos is I never saw them come down. So that is just categorically ridiculous. He would have to have, one of two things would have occurred. The objects would have gone through his ceiling, literally like gaining almost infinite velocity and just jamming through his ceiling. They could have vaporized like his metals and plastics with water in them and that kind of stuff. I mean, you would have water splattering all over the place, wouldn't you? If the adjustable wrench is doing full 360s before it goes up. It could be the string is wrapped around it or something. Oops, you know, it looks great, so let's just put it out there. But if the cup did a 360, then all the water would have been on the tabletop, on the plywood. No such thing occurred. And again, the guy's got a video camera. So I talked about the 35mm solution of just taking pictures of all your equipment. Any of you have ever taken apart a piece of electronics and you forgot to write down what you were doing or take photographs, you know it's very difficult to put the thing back together unless you have a really good memory. But let me tell you, when I took apart the computer I'm looking at right now with the sound wave going across, I lost some screws. Don't know where they are. I also found out a bunch of screws fell out of the computer over the time I was having it, so that's a bad thing. So I need to get a $5 pack of screws to fix it. But you should be taking pictures along the way. He had a video camera there. So after it's all over, after the abysmal photography of these events, zoom so far in that you don't have the whole environment documented, which is part of the hoax. I'm just going to tell you, part of the hoax. You'd pull back the camera, show where everything went. Again, it's just vanishing up in the sky. It never comes back down. What goes up must come down, you know, unless you're launching it into space. But you'd film all the equipment, wouldn't you? Go look at Eric Dollard's Badlands 1986-87 videos, and he is meticulously documenting, almost to like an annoying level, which is me being playful there, all of the factors when he was proving that a longitudinal wave can move through electronic circuits 11 times the speed of light. He's showing you all the measurement equipment that he's using, proving that there's no hoax going on here. And he conducts the transverse wave experiment first, which is 0.8 the speed of light. He shows it to you. But now, to his credit, he's onto something. He may be a complete hoax with this particular result, but his hunch is obviously correct. If one can oscillate a particular object properly or create a field around it or above it that either redirects ethereal winds that would normally hit the object and you just put a barrier over this pine box, everything that's down there is going to fly up, not just the one object, unless you're strategically moving it over various objects, making them fly. Now, they will, as soon as you reduce your wave, they will come back down and hit the board. Another guy created a video claiming to have done this Hutchison Effect. And again, what's funny about it is the whole world's waiting for that effect to happen again. This guy put out like a 1:26-second video where he's doing all kinds of things. And if you truly pay attention, he's cutting the camera because he is dropping things on this piece of plywood and then running the camera backwards. I'll see if I can't find it and then run it the other way. I think it'd be pretty damn funny. So there's hoaxsters around the hoaxsters. But now let's just say for a second or two, this guy did this hoax and the government figured it out. And they're like, you know what, this is actually, it's either we can walk away from this because it's completely harmless and whatever. He's dug his own grave and we'll see if he buries himself in it or whatever. But maybe, I mean, this is me being cynical, but geez, could you be too cynical about government? I don't think so. But you sensationalize the guy. You call the press, you say, get on this dude. Run him all the way up the flagpole. Oh, really? Why should we do that? I mean, is it real? No, it's totally fake. Run up the flagpole. They don't have to even tell the press that. They can tell the press, yeah, we think he might be onto something. Okay. And they want to do the story. What's that do? It runs up a hoax, runs a hoax up the flagpole, thus further extinguishing the entire avenue of research, because someone says, hey, Dad, let's get a bunch of equipment and try the Hutchinson Effect. And Dad goes, nah, that guy was a hoax. He talked about it when his fake UFO thing, and he's not been able to recreate it. So let's not even go down that path. Now, I think the opposite's actually occurred in terms of people attempting it, but you have no empirical data because the guy is not remotely professional about any of his experiments. I guess he just wakes up, puts a blindfold on, and starts flipping knobs and waiting for something to make a ding on the ceiling. Now, the Hathaway guy from Hathaway Research Institute, he recently, and part of his kind of reversal in opinions, he's now saying that he thought that this experiment was done with psychic powers, and that John has a capability of channeling, I guess, the universe's fabric, ethereal winds with his mind, and that's how these experiments occurred. I mean, come on, come on, come on. Now they're taking a big crap on your ability to do that. And so people listen to that explanation, you're like, seriously? In that interview, or in that admission on one of the videos, which was the best one I ever saw in terms of being well documented, a guy talking over what we're seeing, he said that other people were able to recreate the metallurgy experiments, because apparently they're saying that Hathaway is saying that everything he did, from levitation to metallurgy, twisting and turning and having basically the energy weapon results on this thing, was all telepathic. And so he said, well, if John wasn't there, then how did these other people recreate this particular part of his experiment? Well, obviously because that's not it. And what a weird thing to say without some sort of backup case studies. Remember the Skeptic Society, right? If you can do anything that's supernatural, anything that's got a paranormal capability or anything, reading someone's mind, anything, they're willing to give you $1 million. All right. Well, go get yourself some investment capital if you're going to be able to do this with psychic capabilities, you know. Now, to loop back on Judy Wood, her contention, and she has like 3 PhDs in all relative sciences, she did a 3.5-hour presentation based on that day in 2001, where she asserts quite convincingly that weapons from space, or at least from high-flying aircraft, I think it would have to be space, because it needs to be very stationary unless it's an extremely instantaneous thing, plus a flying aircraft coming up with that much power would be tapping into something that we don't know about in the public sector, which is not a big surprise. But she demonstrated with pictures of Ground Zero these round cookie cutter shapes that were pulverizing everything in that area. Of course, the towers are gone, but some of the other buildings down the bottom had impossible cuts with like a round cookie cutter, like 3 buildings together, and, you know, the cookie cutter slices through all of them in a perfect round circle. Not to be confused with the little ground movers that work in a circle, because those are starting to happen on the outer edge as they're picking up all the debris. That creates a circle deprivation of debris. It has nothing to do with what she's talking about. And she made that clear. We know that in Paradise, California, we saw other events or other recreations of events that happened on that day in 2001, where car parts were melting, but other car parts weren't melting. We saw, again, houses burned to ash. We saw houses burned to ash that are out in the woods that have trees all around them and just a little road going up to the house, like someone's got a real nice pad out in the middle of nowhere. Literally. No neighbors, no nothing. It's just a clearing in a circle, and there's a house in the center, and it was burned to ash. But no flames burned any of the trees around the home. I mean, they're all lush and green and perfect. The road, how's the road going to carry a fire? I mean, give me a break. Someone hit this thing with a beam and burned it to the ground. Like, to the ground. Gone. You have tons of homes that are burned to ash, but the foliage around the home is still alive and well and green. The shrubbery, right? Maybe they chopped them down with a herring. I don't know. But Donald Rumsfeld said, you know, in the weeks after that event, do we have directed energy weapons? And he looks to the general, and I kind of have a suspicion the answer means one of two things. He said, oh, yeah, we have them, but we're not going to use them until we need them. Now, Donald Rumsfeld is a very, very brilliant human being. I'm not saying he's a good guy, because he's not. But he's really smart. And he could play with the audience with a straight face, with that general standing next to him, and it might have been just like, let's see if you laugh first. And he goes, yeah, sure, we got those. We don't use them unless we need them. You know, maybe they don't even have them. But he's just playing with the press. He's playing with our enemies who perceive us as having, you know, equipment we haven't announced. But he just announced in a press conference that we have a Black Ops project that created this weapon. He released secret information in the middle of a press conference. Seems a little suspect, doesn't it? Of course, about a week earlier, he was talking about the Pentagon lost $4.4 trillion. They had cooked the books down to 2.2, and gosh dang it, man, all that paperwork was in the side of the building in the Pentagon that had a missile hit it. Oh my gosh. Investigation over. Let's start a war in 2 years. The neocons, man, they have a lot of fun, don't they? Now, I also saw there's another channel out there, I should say, that does a bunch of videos on the Hutchison metallurgy part of the game, where, again, I'm going to show you the pictures of all this during the video. And that's when I edit the video, and I'm like, damn it, you should have shut your mouth, and I got to go get all these photos. But they're pretty easy to see. This guy is fascinated with the metals that John made using this other effect on the metal to get them to torque and twist and unravel from each other. I mean, some are very impressive, very amazing. One of them is a copper bar. It's really long, probably about 18 inches or so. It looks like a 2x2 or something like that. And it actually ruptured from the inside and created 4 corners that kind of blew away from each other, with the center core being vaporized, I guess. Now, the thing that John's, in the interview I saw where he was reviewing all these pieces, and again, why not show the guy? Why not just start up all the equipment and do a little piece right in front of him, right? Nope. Never even made an excuse why he couldn't do it. I mean, you could say, you know, I just moved in here, my equipment's not quite all operational. Maybe later I'll do it for you. None of that talk. When I taught you guys about the depleted uranium problem and the fact that it's not depleted of the radiation that it contains, it's just depleted of, I believe, 234 and 235, or 5 and 6, I think one of those two, which they use for plutonium, it still is massively radioactive when these things go out of a Gatling gun inside an A-10. But metal has a property that's called metal shielding. The reason why the pilots or the Abrams tank drivers who have these type of ordnance aren't going to immediately die from having this type of ordnance in their vehicle is that if the round is dry, it has what's called metal shielding, which is its very composition fights the radiation that comes out of the bar itself. It is actually pushing as many shedding electrons into the bar as coming out. And so that cancels a lot of what it actually escapes out of it until you fire the round, which I believe the A-10 round is about 14 inches long. And it turns into molten steel out of the barrel. It even slows down the plane when they pull the trigger, man. I mean, it is the most gut-wrenching sound if you're a victim of it, you know? But that's why when it hits the armor on its target, and unless that armor is made of uranium as well, it just goes right through it like butter, and then it splatters inside. It's super duper hot, and there's hundreds of rounds coming in at any one burst. And so the ordnance inside the tank explodes, and you win. So when I see some of these pieces that have kind of burst from within, my mind goes to metal shielding. The very composition is one thing, but the shape of the metal is a different thing, and how the frequency is applied to the metal is the third thing. The copper piece that popped from center and ejected the 4 corners, the 4 sides at the center, it looks as if those electrodes or whatever means was used to exert energy on it were attached to the bottom and the top. And so they collide in the center. That collision is probably going to look a lot like an egg, an elongated elliptical egg shape, in my opinion. And it's going to convince those atoms to essentially unwind. What's interesting about it is that John never talked about whether or not these things were accomplished without any thermal radiation coming off of heat. I would have liked to have heard him say that. But he has another piece of what looks like aluminum, and he had a kitchen knife embedded inside of it. Seems to have made a signature all the way through the metal. Even though the kitchen knife is only in about, a 1/4 inch at the top, it cast a shadow, a molecular shadow on the bottom of this pretty much 3/4 inch, 1 inch thick piece of aluminum, or cast alloy, as he calls it, I think. I couldn't find any distinction with cast alloys. I mean, alloys is many things and whatever. There's aluminum alloys, but that makes sense to me because here comes a bunch of energy that's going to make the weakest metal turn into a pudding. So the knife goes down inside of it. Then you turn off the frequency. What's also happened is because the knife has shielded, because it perhaps has a stronger nuclear bond / ethereal orbits, it's creating an echo of itself down below because the rest of the bar is doing something more random, thus keeping it looking like it did before the experiment occurred as a texture, as a surface. But it looks as if the knife may have straightened out the atoms underneath it. Thus, it looks more smooth, and you have this imprint on the other side. Now, there's one piece where the two kind of turn into almost like tentacles, a bunch of like spaghetti, and it happened directly at the center of this beam of aluminum or whatever, cast alloy. And that was very intriguing. But this dude did a video where he was likening, there was some gauge, some like metal gauge that was off some piece of equipment that was cut at least a third off. And it had some ruptures in the metal. It honestly looked like the same exact pattern that rust does on something, but it was pitted in this particular pattern. And this guy takes a video of sunspots and likens the sunspot growth / mechanism of which sunspots occur, which is plasma driven, and says, he shows the sunspot thing and he shows the gauge and he says, man, if you don't believe this is real, I don't know what's wrong with you. And it's just like, dude. And he never said a scientific thing in his conversation. He just said, look at these two shapes. They're the same. Boom. Okay. But now the one claim that I haven't mentioned yet, because it's sort of the best part of the weirdness, is that when you listen to John talk, he says he knows nothing about mathematics at all and that he's more of an intuitive experimenter, and I completely understand that. There is that. I mean, I think that Tesla was very intuitive about what he did, but he was also very good at mathematics and could see electrons. I mean, he could just see them. Most people who are into deep electronic inventions, they have the same capability nowadays because they stand on the shoulders of giants. But it's a serious epiphany that you have. Like calculus will get you, statistics will get you until all of a sudden it goes click in your brain. You're like, oh my God, I totally see it. And then everything becomes easy. There's all kinds of things like that. First time you look at a car engine, you probably don't understand any of the pieces and parts. Once you get how it all works, you're intuitive about everything. You can just turn the engine on and listen to it. And you're like, oh yeah, that's the water pump. But John has two concepts he mixes together, which, because it sounds great. And again, if you're kind of a faux scientist, this is where your conversation will drift without any true connection points to the fancy words you're using. He will lament about a zero-point energy system being a part of his accomplishments, that without zero-point energy, he wouldn't get his levitation videos. Without zero-point energy, he would not have been able to pulverize the steel. I think there's no connection whatsoever, but it would be nice to have a zero-point energy system. But after saying these words, he never connects it again. It's just, oh, okay. Why don't you say the word quantum while you're at it? Because it sounds cool, right? The second half of the same statement, he will talk about pulling that energy from another dimension, because that sounds cool and scientific too, doesn't it? Another dimension. Well, study Eric Dollard, study all the OG founders of electricity, and as soon as you understand that there's ethereal winds, you don't have any more dimensions that you need to pull in. You don't. You just don't understand the fabric of the universe. That's all. And so it seems like magic to you that this kind of alteration in mass is possible. I just watched I posted this on the Facebook page. I just watched tonight a movie that I almost can't even believe it got made, which is Pixar's Soul. This movie is gorgeous. It's well written. It's clever. It's new. And many of their... the premise is not going to ruin a damn thing. I could probably, other than telling you the ending, I could tell you almost half of the movie and nothing would be spoiled for you in one minute. It's about a guy who's a music teacher. He's a pianist. But like all music teachers, he knows all instruments really well. His dream is to be a jazz musician. And what's strange is the credits don't roll for a really long time. I missed the very first 2 minutes of it, but the credits roll real deep in the movie. It's really strange. But he gets a gig, finally, to be a jazz musician at some nightclub in a really cool band. Like a little three-piece, And he's so excited. He's just walking home, and he's on cloud nine, man, and he's not paying attention, and he falls into a manhole and ends up in not exactly heaven, but this cooler place. The existential conversations they're having about life is the best I've ever heard written, especially for a mass product from Pixar. You would think that most people reading that dialogue and some agency would be like, okay, this is kind of heavy, man. But they let it all go through, and it was really well done. But there's a point in the film where a little analogy comes out, and it's trying to get him to see his perspective in the universe. And this woman tells him a story about a fish that goes up to another fish, and somehow a conversation starts where he says, you look like you're lost. What's going on? And the fish that is new to the area goes, I'm looking for the ocean. And the other fish says, well, you're in it. You're in the ocean right now. That's where you are. And the fish says back, nah, this is just water. I'm looking for the ocean. And I just thought about all of our episodes we've ever done where I give you the analogy that ether is, if you understand water and the many methods that water moves and the different names we give water when it moves differently, then you will completely understand ether. And the whole universe becomes child's play. It becomes a finger painting. You could teach children with a modicum of awareness, I guess, probably from the age of 5 to 10, but from 9 to 10, they can completely understand how the whole universe is put together. I just want to go through the old analogy one more time and apply it back to the Hutchison thing. If you fill up a sink full of water, we all did it as kids, and you plug it up, right? And then you want to see the tornado, right? You pull the plug out and you watch the vortex of water go down. You just see it. You put your finger in it and you're like, oh my God. And you put your finger in the center of the tornado where it's still dry, but you're actually like 2 or 3 inches down below the surface of the average mean of water. It's just that fun little thing you do. You do it when you're draining the tub when you're a little kid taking baths, right? I think adults still would do it, but we just don't expose ourselves to it. But we stop that moment and take a photograph of it. And then we show it to somebody and we go, what is that right there? I'm going to show you a picture. Tell me what it is. And they go, oh, it's a vortex. It's a current. It's a whatever, tornado of water. And I say, no, it's just water. Yeah, okay, jerk. I understand that. I see a little trick you did there. I thought you were asking me about the state of the water that it's in at that point. We have no problem understanding that, do we? When water behaves a certain way, we call it a different thing. You could go to Yellowstone and point at Old Faithful, right? And when it starts doing its little geyser thing, what's that? It's a geyser. Nope, it's just water. What's steam? Oh, it's steam. It's just water. You get my point. When ether behaves a particular way, when it gets caught up in the currents of its incredibly dense presence in the universe, we call that things. We call them quarks. We call them electrons, neutrons, protons, muons. We call them everything. And that's the whole universe, man. The reason why I'm reintroducing that at the end of this episode is to remind you that the concepts that surround all of the Hutchison effects is based on this principle. One is the behavior of ether creating gravity, and one is disrupting the nuclear bonds / currents. Okay, you could take your hand when that thing is draining down the sink. You could take your hand and push it in there and mix up all that water, and that current goes away for a little while, and then it will reconstitute if there's enough water and time to do so. The thing is that we can't just wave our hands and make this microphone disappear. Why? Because those currents are so tight. They're as tight as the mass I would use to try and disturb it. And so when I bump the mic during an episode, you hear this boom, and I try to get rid of them in editing, but sometimes they go through. That's why we can touch our fingers together and they don't pass through each other. That's why we have the reality that we have right now, whether it be a matrix or not. So in summation, I will say that I think that all of his videos of levitation are a hoax. I think they're probably more likely to be strings than a magnet because he did a plastic cup of water. I think that they move like old 50s props back in the day, like an old Thunderbirds episode. Just can't quite get it right, Is there a benefit to creating a hoax like this in this area of science? I think microscopically, yes. Yes, there is a benefit to pointing people in this direction so that they will actually go out and do it. Because he can't recreate this and because he did absolutely nothing to document a profound moment in scientific history, supposedly, I think it's fake. Now, about the metal turning and twisting and all that kind of stuff, well, I think he figured out something. He's got tons of equipment. I think he worked with softer metals, which was smart. I would use the weakest metal out there, some pot steel or something, and start messing with that. Because I don't think it's maybe even use gold. Use a piece of jewelry, something. It's really like 14 karat gold is so freaking soft. You never ever want to buy high carat gold for anything you really want to wear, besides maybe around your neck. But you need to understand if somebody crimps it with their hand or it gets caught on itself and you pull too hard, you'll bend it up. I designed a wedding ring for a buddy of mine, very complex wedding ring. It's a huge castle going around his finger. And it was so soft when he got it back from the jeweler that we had to mount on it a 10 karat ring above and below, like a ring of gold around it to hold it in place. Lesson learned, right? But I do think that can be done, which is why people do it. I do think it is a precursor to the technology that would lead to being able to completely obliterate something like a building, like a car, that happens to be collateral damage when you're trying to take down the buildings. I think this is lock in step with everything that our government in a military capacity would never want us to figure out, because I'll just give you a few examples that would go on potentially in a military think tank. So you got a military think tank, and as part of that think tank, you have individuals who know exactly how this works 100%. And so you have generals that aren't technical, but they're strategic in their thinking. And they ask the table, all right, tell us what the threat is with this Hutchison Effect coming out and inspiring people to go off and do this. And they say, well, a couple things. Those Boston Dynamic robots that we eventually plan to take over the world? Well, they could just develop pretty easy off-the-shelf methodologies. One, they would be able to find zero-point energy by taking Tesla's technology and harvesting ethereal winds, coiling them down into the Earth's crust and yanking out infinite power like he did in Colorado Springs, hence the photograph. And they'd be able to utterly obliterate, turn into mist and non-existent thermal energy, all the stuff that we throw at them. In addition, they could knock helicopters out of the sky, and with enough power, they could knock bombers out of the sky. They could melt our tanks, melt bullets before they ever get hit by them. It could get to that extreme, so therefore we must engage in a psyop to make sure that none of this information ever gets any traction, to mislead everyone, to push them towards the hoaxsters and make sure they don't look at people like Eric Dollard who might be able to do something real. You know, the big thing is that there was an old strategy, and it still exists, where if you were doing, you know, horrendous electrical experiments, well, one, your power bill is going to be through the roof, but two, that spike in power use might set off some bells. You might have some people visiting your house. But if you get into, I wouldn't necessarily say zero-point energy, but free energy technology that Tesla was working on with his Wardenclyffe Tower, there's no one who knows that you've created a source of power that is pretty much inexhaustible. Therefore, your inventions could harness inventions that aren't possible without that kind of power supply. The sad reality of the world is that the most technically minded people that could probably execute a creative idea typically have very dysfunctional right brains. And that's not a complete slam on them. We need people that are very astute left brain people, but they're just not that creative. In the military and the intelligence community, they test you for months and months and months before you get to join the organization, and they try to ensure that you actually do not have the growth capability to gain a right brain. They check your loyalties. They check how much mass media that you're willing to ingest as 100% truth until the day you die. Then they reward you handsomely, both with status and money and power, perhaps, to solidify that you are right in your way of thinking. Thus, you will not change the way you think. Anyone who's trying to be brought into, you know, like an Area 51 or an S4, if that exists, those would be solicited for the opposite capability. Or I should say probably both sides of their brain. Super technically brilliant, but very creative as well. Tesla was one of those. He was a left and a right brainer. Extremely creative. Don't forget, he created a remote control boat that he demonstrated in front of the public in, I think, 1898. Seriously? We don't have protocols traveling over invisible frequencies at that age. And he created a protocol of control. Not only did he create a transmitter and a receiver and a power supply in that boat so it would be able to do whatever it's supposed to do, he was able to say, when you get this stream of data, I want you to turn the rudder right, left. I'm assuming he had some propulsion system that would either turn on or off. That is so utterly and incredibly brilliant for his era. I don't know that I can easily match that one little thing at that time in history. I'm sure the government has things of that creative level. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. This is one I honestly been wanting to do forever, but I'm not even sure if I have it in my list. So again, to the listener who pushed me, thank you so much. Hopefully you appreciate it's the very next video you see. And, you know, I am always interested in your ideas. I have gotten a lot of new leads with names. I will just restate, because I haven't stated it for probably 100 episodes. If you have a suggestion where it's just like a name, I'd love for you to talk about this guy, and please put a little bit of a descriptor in there as to what it is that this person's into, and sort of any questions you might have that you want me to answer with my opinion, because that way you're infecting the episode with your DNA. You're saying, he answered that question because I asked him to answer that question. Let's make it fun. Let's make it interactive. I absolutely love that format. But anyway, if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go there and just bookmark it. It's got everything up there. I've been telling you guys, or asking you, to please go over to BitChute and create an account and subscribe over there. That is truly the leading YouTube replacement. They are 100% no popularity contests to get it going. Brand new tube seems to be a completely abandoned website. They've got a 404 error on their GoPro option, but they stop you to 150 videos and say, you got to go pro if you want to put any new videos up there, and you click it and it goes to 404. You communicate with their support team. Nothing comes back. Again, Brighteon's a joke. LBRY is pretty cool, that TV. They've also pulled over, 280 episodes. So they had a limit to what they were going to allow me to pull over, but that's fine. That's a lot of videos. I can't track whether or not anyone's ever watched them unless I click on every single video. I don't think they're getting any play over there, but whatever. It's over there. But anyway, we have our social media, audio. We have ways to contribute through Patreon. For those of you coming on board, got a few new folks. Thank you so much. You're in the credits forever unless you ask not to be. And we have a store with a couple new tchotchkes for Season 6. Anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over and out.